Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I hope you all are having a great day. Thanks so much for joining. I am just going to let you guys know that we do have a chat box in the right of your screen where you guys are more than welcome to put comments or questions in throughout the presentation. We will be addressing questions at the end, though, so just be aware that there will be time for that. However, if you just want to send it in the chat, that way we have it there, that would be wonderful. All right, guys, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining our webinar today with Ben and I from Layton. So we're going to be talking about the Orphan Drug Tax Credit specifically, which is a very niche tax credit available to companies who have orphan drugs or are developing orphan treatments. And it gives you guys an opportunity to essentially reclaim funds, specifically from those really expensive human clinical trials. So a little brief background about Layton. We are an international company. We have over 25 years of experience primarily in innovation funding around the world. So we do work with a lot of international companies. We have 2 offices in the United States, one in Boston and one in San Francisco, with Boston being our base. So if any of you are in the local area, please let us know. We would love to grab lunch or something. All right. So our presenters today will first be myself. So my name is Savannah Durham. I'm an assistant team lead here and senior technical consultant. I have been here now for a little over 5 years, working specifically on the R&D Tax Credit, Orphan Drug Tax Credit, and then some innovation grants. My background is in chemical engineering originally. I used to work for Merck Pharmaceuticals. So being in the biotech space is very much my niche, I would say, or at least one of my favorites. With that, I will hand it over to our other presenter, Ben, before we get started on the meat and potatoes of the conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Savannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Brissett. I am the employee retention tax credit and other incentives here as well.
Ben, I think you might have cut out just there for a second. I'm not sure if that was a mic issue, but you might just give your intro just one more time.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, maybe a little closer to the computer, probably.
Interesting. My typical setup. Sorry, guys.
I don't
know. Just quick background. I've been with Layton coming up on 5 years now, working on the innovation tax credit and other incentives here. But I'll try and get my mic sorted, and I can jump back in later on. So, Savannah, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Ben. Okay, everyone. So just a little bit about our agenda for the day. We will be just giving a brief background on orphan drugs, rare disease treatments, the orphan drug tax credit, etc., an overview of the tax credit itself, how companies are eligible to qualify for the tax credit, what the calculation involves, and how that ends up coming out from the most important probably aspect of the tax credit besides the rare disease treatment, right, is the money. And then interaction with the R&D tax credit. And then finally, just a quick brief overview of some other services that we have here at Layton. So some backgrounds, why is it that the government has these incentives? Why does this exist in the first place? As many of you probably already know, rare diseases are diseases in the United States that affect less than 200,000 individuals. And that qualifies essentially as a rare disease. So because there's less than 200,000 individuals impacted, the market and potential return on investment for developing these treatments historically was not great. The Orphan Drug Tax Credit was created as part of the Orphan Drug Act in the early 80s to essentially remedy this, to incentivize companies to develop these treatments or these remedies for rare diseases. There are some examples of some rare diseases that are, as again, most of you guys already know. but there's about 8,000 orphan diseases worldwide. So there is a lot of the population that is affected by these. So it's very important that the government incentivize the development of these treatments. So what is an orphan drug specifically? Orphan drugs are defined as therapies or pharmaceutical agents that are intended specifically to treat orphan diseases or rare diseases. Now, that is, as I said, less than 200,000 people per year in the US. There is a case that you can be qualified as an orphan drug, or your drug can be designated as such, if there is no reasonable expectation that the sale of the drug is going to offset the cost of developing the drug within the US market specifically. So that is all involved in your orphan drug filing. Then we get to the actual orphan drug tax credit. So once you have your orphan drug filing, how can you benefit from this tax credit itself? So some background on the impact of this Orphan Drug Act in general. So prior to passing the Orphan Drug Act in 1983, only 39 drugs existed. Since passing the act, there's been over 1,000 new orphan drugs. You guys can see on the right here just that massive increase. So these people are real patients getting real treatments as a result of these incentives. And when you get your orphan drug designation and you have a treatment that is designated as an orphan drug, right, then you have all of these incentives available. So you have the 25% federal tax credit. That's the orphan drug tax credit, which we're speaking about today. There's also some marketing exclusivity, some fee waivers, some research grants only available for people with orphan drugs, and then some regulatory filing assistance to companies that are developing these treatments. All right, and finally, for orphan drug tax credit qualification, which kind of ties into all of that, everything we've been talking about thus far, the most important thing, and really the only requirement when it comes to actually being eligible to use certain expenses for the credit, is that you've received an orphan drug designation letter through the FDA's Office of Orphan Products Development. So obviously, a lot of you might already be familiar with what this looks like. This is something that Layton requests as part of its substantiation process for the orphan drug tax credit. It's a letter. It has an official date. After you receive that letter is really the timeline of when you are eligible to start claiming the orphan drug tax credit. Now, the second kind of filter as to qualification or requirements is that we can only look at expenses that go towards clinical testing. So those are human clinical trials after you've received the orphan drug designation, but before the drug receives new drug approval. So I have a little visual representation here that I think will be illustrative of kind of the timeline of development when it comes to these drugs. If you guys are considering developing a treatment, I think this is something that should weigh into your decision from the start. So obviously you have your preclinical testing, any animal testing, that's going to take your initial, 2 to 5, 3 to 6 years of development. Once you get your R&D application is about the same time that you're getting that orphan drug designation. So when you get that orphan drug designation and you're good to go to start phase 1 clinical trials, phase 1, whatever is necessary based on your recommendation, you start your human clinical trials. During all of those clinical trials, any expenses that are going towards that, any time, any effort that we are able to include can be used for the tax credit calculation. And then after you get your new drug approval is when, or your new drug application, when it's released, is really when you cannot claim the orphan drug tax credit any longer. So it's a limited window. Of course, with human clinical testing, it's a pretty long window, and it's also expensive. So it is a very lucrative and very beneficial credit for anyone who's doing clinical trials if it's tied specifically to that orphan drug or that orphan drug designation. All right, and I'll pass it over to Ben now to kind of wrap us up with some more of the financial aspects of our study.
Perfect. Microphone working okay now, guys?
That's great.
Perfect. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, so continuing what Savannah was going over really on the orphan drug tax credit, there's the calculation side is fairly straightforward. Later on, I'll go into some of the comparisons with the R&D tax credit, but the orphan drug tax credit is just a straight 25% of total qualified clinical expenses. The credit, quite simply put, we have a little chart here. You can add up all your wages, supplies, and contractors, total those up, and then the credit comes out to 25% of those expenses. Of course, they do have to be related, directly to those clinical trials for these orphan drugs. But anything that qualifies underneath, any employee wages, any CROs that you're working with, some supplies that you guys are using during these clinical trials, those are all qualified orphan drug expenditures and can be included in this total here. It's, like I said, just a fairly straightforward calculation from there. One thing to note is that primarily foreign expenses are not included because this is a U.S. tax credit. They do want to keep expenses limited to anything that's any research that's conducted within the United States. But there is an exception if there is an insufficient testing population here in the U.S. because of some of these orphan drug and orphan diseases. It's very difficult to find a patient population. So if that is the case, and the FDA does approve expenses overseas, they can potentially be included in the credit as well. On the similarities or the simplicities of the credit, there's no base period calculation like there is in the research and development credit. And just general note, because the IRS wants to make sure there's no double dipping or overclaiming of credits, you can't use expenses towards both the R&D and orphan drug credits. There is a way to intermingle the two and be able to claim both of them, but you can't use the same expenses when claiming both of them. And I'll go into that a little bit further later on. As far as actually claiming the credit, it is filed right on this form 8820. Right on the top, I know it's a little small here, but top on line 1, you just put the credit right there. It's 25% of those research expenses. And then on the bottom, you just list out the orphan drug designation, some information from the FDA that you got while receiving approval. And this just gets filed with your yearly income tax return. Whether you guys are filing as a sole proprietorship or any type of corporation or partnership, it's just included there and then flows through to your general credits on the form 3800. Similar to most other credits, it does have a 1-year carryback and a 20-year carry forward. So if you aren't profitable in the current year, this is an income tax credit, so it does offset income taxes. But if you aren't profitable in the current year, it can be carried forward up to 20 years or backwards that 1 year to offset any previous or potential income taxes in the future. Like I mentioned, there are some interactions with the R&D and orphan drug credit because they are both primarily a research-based credit. Just some high-level comparisons between the two. The orphan drug credit makes up about the credit comes out to about 25% of those total qualified clinical expenses. The R&D credit in comparison is typically around 10%. The reason I say typically is because there is a base period. It's technically an incremental increase credit. And what that really means is it's not just a straight percentage of total expenses. Like the orphan drug, the reason I said it was quite simple is it's 25% of those expenses. The R&D, it's a percentage of expenses over your base period or a percentage of your average annual gross receipts. It's just a little bit more complex, but we say around 10%, although that can vary from really down to 0 up to like 12, 13%. Both the orphan drug and the R&D tax credits offset income taxes. The R&D tax credit also does have a payroll tax credit version, though, available to newer businesses, typically within the first 5 years of existence. The orphan drug tax credit does not have that same capability. It is only an income tax credit. And then aside from that, of course, the orphan drug tax credit, you need that designation. The orphan drug designation in order to qualify. If you don't have that designation, you'd likely qualify under the R&D tax credit. So it's certainly, whether you do or don't have that designation, it is worth looking into one or both of the credits and seeing how we can maximize them for you. Speaking of maximizing them, like I said, there is a way to claim both the orphan drug and research and development tax credits. I mentioned earlier, the same expenses can't be used for both credits, but that doesn't mean there aren't expenses that can be allocated to each. For instance, if you're working on a drug that has received orphan drug designation, all those clinical trial expenses can go towards the orphan drug credit. But let's say you're working on another drug that hasn't received that designation yet. All those expenses can go towards the research and development tax credit, and then you're able to get a credit for both of them. Therefore, maximizing your benefit in the back end. It's worth noting that because that research and development credit is that incremental increase, you do have to add the orphan drug credit expenses back into those base years. This is where it does get kind of complex, and where we would really, walk you through all that and do all those calculations for you, because while they aren't included in the current year, they are included in prior years, and it's just the way the IRS, again, looks at comparing apples to apples and making sure credits aren't being overclaimed or overstated. So the two main considerations that we look into, and this chart is similar to what Savannah had earlier, is just those payroll tax the payroll tax offset implications, and then how much the total credit can increase between the two. And the reason we mentioned the payroll tax is if you're not profitable, and you are, you're not profitable, but you are looking to still claim, it might be more beneficial to claim the research credit than the orphan drug, because the research has the research credit does have that payroll version where the orphan drug tax credit doesn't. So that's one thing that we certainly like to look at, depending on tax paying and tax liability positions you guys might currently be in. And like I mentioned, this is very similar to the timeline Savannah mentioned above, as far as what the orphan drug tax credit can be utilized, or when the expenses can be utilized for that credit. That is really just during the clinical phases, but the R&D credit can be outside of those as well. So before designation, and then after your submission for the new drug approval, the R&D tax credit can cover all phases. The orphan drug is really that middle, that clinical trial phase. But certainly, you're able to claim all along and throughout for both. And then this is just a little bit of a background. I'm not sure if anyone on here today was on one of our previous One Big Beautiful Bill webinars we recently had. If not, we'd love to send you the link, or I'm sure you can find it on one of our LinkedIn accounts. But this is the change of research expenses that came from that One Big Beautiful Bill. There's been a lot of talk about Section 174, research expenses, how they need to be capitalized or amortized, or if they can be fully deducted. This is just a snapshot of some of those changes, because from 2022 to 2024, they required expenses to be capitalized and amortized if they're research in nature. If these expenses were research in nature, sorry about that, guys. However, starting in 2025, these expenses can be fully deducted in the year in which they were incurred. So that's for all companies, regardless of size. However, for companies that are below a $31 million in average annual gross receipts threshold, they actually can go back and amend their 22 through 24 tax returns and reverse that capitalization and amortization requirement. In that case, they can go back, fully deduct those expenses in those years, and then once the IRS processes it, they can issue a refund for any overpayment in taxes because of those capitalized expenses. Alternatively, rather than amending any prior years, you can just accelerate your remaining amortization in 2025. A little bit cleaner. You don't have to go back and amend, and you still get that catch up of all remaining amortization expenses. So, these research or the orphan drug tax credit expenses, the clinical trial expenses, those are Section 174 expenses. So in the past couple of years, they would have been impacted by this capitalization requirement. But at this point, because of this rule change for 2025 and onward, you no longer do have to do that. You can fully deduct them and take a credit on top of them. So definitely a good benefit on top of those deductible expenses already. And lastly, before we take some questions and go through the rest, we really just wanted to go over latent services. As Savannah mentioned at the start, we are primarily rooted in innovation funding. That is our bread and butter across the world and everything that we do. It's why we're the worldwide leader in innovation funding. But on top of innovation, we also have some state and local tax services and energy efficiency services. I'd love to, sit here and I can tell you everything about all of those tax credits and services, but we have experts in those fields. There's a reason I'm doing the innovation webinar today, and we have other people doing the engineering one coming up, beginning of October. But we are able to help in a lot of areas, whether it comes to sales tax refund reviews, any nexus questions, cost segregation, 179D. I know there's been a lot of changes the One Big Beautiful Bill brought in the energy area. So I know there's been a lot of questions that have come up. We'd love to answer them for you. We do have some past webinars that we can pass around, and then, of course, book a meeting with one of our experts in the field. If it's on the innovation side, Savannah and myself, most likely will be on one of those calls. But if it's elsewhere, we have teams that are, experts in their fields and able to address any questions that you guys might have, and maybe help save you guys some extra money down the road. Let's see. I did see one question come in. Let's see. Are there any restrictions on using the orphan drug credit, such as carry forward rules or limitations for companies without tax liability? No real restrictions aside from that you just have a 20-year carry forward of that tax credit. So if you aren't profitable in the current year, if you have NOLs or for whatever reason aren't paying taxes, the credit can still be, a good benefit to you. It can just help offset taxes in future years. If you guys are a C corporation and the tax credit is at the company level, it can also be included in valuations and help offset. If you were to ever sell the company, it would help offset their future tax liabilities as well. So there certainly are, definitely some good benefits of claiming right now, even if you aren't in a tax-paying position.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's worth mentioning that I know a lot of in the pharmaceutical space or in the biotech space, as Ben said, this does offset income tax liability. It can be carried forward 20 years. Of course, a lot of companies might specialize in developing a certain drug and then have a plan to sell their business. As long as the income is derived from the business itself, an activity at the business, it can offset any income tax associated with that. So it could also offset capital gains tax from the sale of the business. So, maybe you're not paying taxes now. You plan on selling after you get FDA approval. You're looking at about a 10-year timeline, but you're also looking at millions of dollars. So you put the investment in up front, pay those dollars, get the get all of those banked. And then when you sell, you essentially have an enormous offset of any capital gains tax. So it's a lot of strategic kind of planning around really any niche tax credit, but especially the innovation ones. Okay, let's see here. So then it looks like we have one more question also from Jay. Do we need FDA designation before we can start claiming the credit, or can we apply retroactively once designation is granted? Okay, so that's a good question. You can only claim for activity. So it's essentially just like the R&D credit, it's an activity-based credit. So you can only claim for expenses spent on activity after the designation. So let's say you get your designation midway through the year, like in June of 2025, then come 2026, when you're filing your 2025 taxes, we would only consider the expenses from those 6 months where the designation had been officially received. So you can't claim retroactively, like receive the designation in June and then claim for expenses in 2024. So it really depends on just when you get that designation. It's really anything after that. Like that's the hard stop line. But you can, however, go backwards. Let's say you received the designation in 2023 and you didn't claim the orphan drug tax credit. then right now you could look back and you could amend 2023 and 2024 to claim the orphan drug tax credit. So you are absolutely able to amend your returns to claim the credit, but as long as you had that orphan drug designation during the time that you're claiming on the tax returns. I don't think I missed anything on that, did I, Ben?
No, all good there. It's definitely, you can claim it retroactively, but like you said, up to the date you received that designation. It could be back to 2022 if that tax return is still open to be amended. It's just you can't claim any expenses from before the designation, the official designation date.
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we have our QR code here. You all guys are more than welcome to schedule a call with us. We're always happy to chat, always happy to answer any questions anyone has. Please feel free to scan that. I know we will be sending around this recording, so you should be receiving that from our marketing team, and it will also be posted on our Layton YouTube page. So please check that out. Send it to anyone that you think might be relevant or could benefit from the credit. And we really appreciate everyone listening today. And we hope we get to talk to some of you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Have
so
a great
much.
one.